Tonight we're actually going to talk about climate change. This is obviously a very important subject. It's a subject that I think many of us in the room care deeply about. Young people care about it for obvious reasons in terms of the impact on their future. I think many of us with children care about it, in particular because we worry about the future that we are leaving to our children. And I think others care about it because they are seeing the impacts of climate change that are actually happening all around us already. So why are we here? I think Charles talked a little bit about that, but it's really about seeking input and ideas with respect to things that you think we should be doing as a government, or ideas that perhaps we are not aware of, local ideas that can actually drive change at the local level to address climate change. And to add those ideas to town halls like this that are going on across the country, in ridings across the country. Tonight is actually about hearing from you, not me speaking to you all.
Give the voice back to the scientists. Better government-funded research and grant systems for backing up the evidence that this technology does work.
We also have people in the tar sands. There's a group called Iron and Earth that are actually retraining workers.
We break the monopoly of BC Hydro so that it's forced to buy back power from small local producers. That will kickstart local energy production and decentralize power production.
So we could begin with the boreal forests in central Canada, some of which are being decimated by tar sands development. But all of our forests, they store carbon and they produce oxygen, so we need to
raise the national excise tax on gasoline. This has been very successful in Europe.
One that we came up with was the 2010 passenger automobile and light truck greenhouse gas emission regulations that came into effect. Canada's suck. The goal is 169 grams of carbon per kilometer. Europe is about 30 grams better. Canada should immediately match European standards and insist the car manufacturers give us that technology.
Really struck us was that there wasn't enough education post-elementary education about the jobs that are available for innovation, technology, changing things in our own communities right now.
It really falls kind of into at least three major buckets. One is you can price the carbon that's being polluted in an effort to actually change behavior. You can regulate in order to actually change the way in which things are being done. Or you can do it through awareness and therefore trying to encourage behavioral change on the part of individuals. And I think you heard a number of those different elements in different suggestions that came tonight. But the reality is we're embarking on a transition, and a transition will take time. We will be working towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions over time. We will not be shutting down the oil sands. So as we move forward, we need to ensure that we actually are addressing the issues around creating an economic base across the country that will replace hydrocarbon products as we actually move to a lower carbon economy. But I think it's important to say that all hydrocarbon projects that are proposed on a go-forward basis need to fit within an overall carbon framework. And that means if our target is to achieve 30% below 2005 by 2030, that means that if there's a new project that's proposed, it needs to be accounted for in the context of getting to the absolute emissions target that we're going to get. And any government, provincial or federal, is going to have to account for any incremental emissions by looking at other ways that they're going to reduce emissions in order to account for that. That's important as a framing piece, and it's going to be important as a framing piece. It's the same way that European countries actually manage their emissions. If you look at Britain, they have 5-year carbon budgets. They're managed exactly that way. That's very different from the previous government, but it's also different from governments that preceded it, in the sense that, it's one thing to say that you care about climate change and you want to see emissions go down. It's another thing to say you have a specific target that you're going to achieve and you're going to measure your progress towards that target on an ongoing basis. And that is what this government has said it's going to do, and it's working with the provinces to ensure that we have a plan for doing that. This is one of the reasons I got into politics in the first time. I spent the last 20 years in the clean tech space, and I got into this in large part because I have kids. They're going to grow up in a world that's going to be significantly impacted by climate change, and so I think this is something we're making that kind of effort to to be part of trying to address. If this does not become a non-political issue, so that all of the major parties in Canada believe and have plans for how we actually reduce carbon emissions, then the risk is that 4 years from now, or 8 years from now, this all gets undone. The issue on carbon pricing, we need to price carbon. I mean, it's pollution. And so the fact that we actually, in Canada until very recently didn't price carbon and therefore didn't give an incentive to people to actually reduce their carbon emissions is a little bit crazy. We have cap and trade systems in Ontario, Quebec, and Manitoba. We have a kind of a hybrid system in Alberta, and we have a carbon tax in British Columbia. And the use of the funds that come from those are also being used for wildly different things. So in Alberta, they intend to use it to invest in innovation. In BC, we return it to taxpayers through cuts in income taxes. And you want to get to equivalency in some respect with respect to the actual price that's being put on carbon in different parts of the country. That's not simple because of the way in which different systems work. And then finally, you want some certainty with respect to the rate that you're going to escalate the carbon price. In terms of how can you actually build this whole sustainability and climate, not just climate change, the whole broader sustainability conversation much more fully into the K-12 curriculum. Because kids in K-12, to be honest, are a lot more environmentally aware than I was when I was their age. I mean, my kids understand way more about environmental issues than I ever did at their age. But I do think that whole issue of how do we actually focus on the educational system is an important one. I thought the point about the oil sands and converting into graphite is interesting. I've never heard of that, but that's interesting. I think, to be honest, that those are some of the things that we need to start to be thinking about is how do we actually make major step changes in the way in which resources are utilized. And the one caution I would have around clean tech, and I spent the last 20 years in the clean tech business, is there's kind of two elements of clean tech. There is project deployment, where you're essentially taking existing proven technologies and you're deploying them out there. So large-scale wind turbines, multiple solar cells, those kinds of things, whether they're actually developed and manufactured in Canada or not. So most of the wind comes from Denmark. A lot of the solar manufactured cells come from China. And so that's a deployment of technologies that help you to reduce emissions by essentially reducing your dependence on fossil fuels for power or for heat. And then there's the other part of clean tech, which is how do we actually create an economy that essentially develops new innovations in technology that essentially start to displace and take the place of conventional hydrocarbons as part of the foundation for the economy. Public utilities need to be part of the conversation, absolutely, with respect to buying in small-scale power, utilizing new technologies, using procurement as a tool to actually drive innovation and commercialization of clean technologies. Public utilities in Canada are typically almost the worst in terms of technology adoption, and they will require political will to change. Public utilities in Canada are provincial in all provinces except a couple where it's not a provincial utility like in Alberta. But the province regulates even in Alberta. And so I think that bringing this forward is something that we really believe that the provinces need to focus on in terms of ensuring that the utilities are being used as a tool for advancing both carbon emission reductions, but also the deployment of technology. Canadian technology, I think, is a really, really important one, and I'm glad that was raised, because that's a really important issue. And Europe has been very strongly on the path of reducing carbon emissions, and including aggressive carbon pricing for the last couple of decades. And it was almost by itself for a long time, and yet it continued to do that because it actually believed that it was the right thing to do. All right, well, thanks again. I really appreciate it for showing up.